Let's compare my old Bionicle creations to my newer ones. Whether we're comparing stuff from 2011 to things I've made in the last few years, or if we just want to have some fun and look at how some older MOCs evolved back in the day. Hopefully by doing a little bit of comparing and contrasting, I can give you guys some inspiration. Let's dive in. The first MOC I want to talk about today is this revamp of Stormer 1.0. So the 1.0 heroes had just come out. I really wanted to explore this new style of building, these new sets, and these new pieces as well. But I wasn't really a big fan of how those sets looked. They were too small, at least in my eyes. So I said, okay, let me make them a little bigger. So I got a very kind of basic Anika frame. You can see that here on the limbs, your basic prefab limb pieces, leg pieces, torso pieces. And then I just sort of decked it out with armor and then did my best to shove in all the different Hero Factory pieces that came on Stormer. I put the Hero Factory torso on the back there so that the core was on the back. I don't mind that, it's an interesting way of doing it, but I think looking back on this now in 2024, I really like the iconography of that Hero Factory logo right front and center on the torso. There's just something very iconic about that, so it's a shame to not see that there, but hey, I like the effect that those spikes create coming out of the top of the shoulders. That does look rather nice. The hand design here making it a lot longer with that weapon there. I'm not sure, because it looks like he's got a very, very tiny lower arm there, and the upper arm is massively long, so proportion-wise, not too sure it makes sense. But I like what I was playing with there. That's fun. It's cool to see one of those translucent blue tubing pieces there, just to kind of tie in the icicle effect on the end of that weapon into other parts of the MOC. Back in 2011, I think I was onto something. Although I think, looking back on this now, I think some of these textures are just that little bit too messy. But hey, you know what? This is early stuff. I was having fun. That's all that matters. But then let's move over to a MOC that I made 2 years ago. No, it was only a year ago, I believe. I think it was 2023 or 2022, I want to say. This is Ice Planet Stormer. So of course this is taking inspiration from the lovely LEGO theme known as Ice Planet. Now this wasn't a direct revamp of the original Stormer that I made, but hey, I've made 2 different versions of Stormer now. I thought it would be fun to compare the 2. So really the look I was going for here was this really compact, almost kind of sci-fi armor with very little gaps in it. It's very smooth, it's very sleek, it's just pretty, I think actually comparing these two, it's almost like a stark difference in textures. But I was really doing my best to make something very refined, and I put a lot of work and effort into that, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So I suppose if I'm to reflect on what I learned in 2011 and then now building this in 2024, I think one of my kind of favorite things to do these days when I'm building, whether that's with system stuff or whether that's with Bionicle stuff, I really like to be very deliberate and I guess delicate, I guess that's the word, with when and where I place pieces. If it doesn't need to be there, why is it there? If the textures of these pieces differ from the piece I'm about to put on, why is that the case? I'm going in with this intention or this specific aesthetic or style that I'm trying to emulate. So whenever I put a piece on, it's got to work in favor towards that. And then looking at this older version here, some of these blue hand socket pieces. It's nice to add that little splash of blue. I actually think that looks lovely. But the texture of those hand socket pieces doesn't really flow that well with, say, the leg armor pieces. The same ones that came on Stormer 1.0 that I'm using here on the lower legs. That's got that really fighter jet Gundam mech kind of armored look to it. Then the kind of rigid, greebled, more heavily detailed look of those blue hand socket pieces doesn't really work with that, does it? Then sure, you could get a nice juxtaposition of 2 varying textures, but I don't know, that certainly wasn't the aesthetic I was going for. I think I was trying to emulate some sort of smoother look, but back then I was just let's shove a bunch of pieces on. And again, nothing wrong with that, I was having fun. But that's certainly the learning that I've had moving into building something like this. Yeah, and these weapons were so fun on this Ice Planet Stormer. I love those shoulder cannons, the trans orange chainsaw. You have to have one of those on an Ice Planet MOC. Yeah, this is just really fun, and this is probably one of my favorite MOCs that I've built today, or Bionicle-focused characters, or Construction rather. This is a Hero Factory character, of course, but I'm just really proud of all the texture work I did here. Yeah. Okay, here we go. This next character here, this is one I'm looking forward to talking about. So this one, the one I'm showing you right now, this was actually a different character. I unfortunately don't remember their name, but they did directly inspire the character I'm going to talk about later. So let's briefly highlight this dude here. I loved that Hydraxon mask, and I really wanted to use it on another MOC, or one that was a little bit smaller. And I wanted him to be a bit of a bad guy, so I gave him really spiky shoulders, this huge, large, like dual blade weapon, and then a big old whip. And you can see here that he's being rather mean to Ranu here. Still now, I love the color scheme on this. There's just cool, distinct vibes to this character. He's fun. But many years later, I want to say, so I built this in 2011. I believe this was many years later, it was the next year. This was 2012 that I built this character here. So their name was Alterion, based off of Assassin's Creed Altair, and I just slightly changed the name because I was like, I want to build a cool assassin dude. So yeah, the two characters influenced one another. This was a sort of kind of evolution. And yeah, I gave him a little ninja shuriken that he could throw, like he is in that image there. He's got blades all over his legs. He's got like rocket boosters on his feet. Oh, it was so cool. So this character was my secondary self-moc. That's a term that I don't know if people really use these days anymore. So you had your self-moc, right? Which, for me was my self-moc Kossi. That's the character that represents you. It's you in the Bionicle storyline. It's like a self-insert character for you, but with Bionicle pieces, essentially. But then people sometimes had the idea of like a secondary self-moc or a tertiary self-moc, or, keep going if they really wanted to. And I guess the idea was it's just like, hey, this is another character that I really like, that I identify with in some fashion, or I just think they're really cool. And they're going to be my like secondary self-moc, hence the title. And yeah, this was that character for me. But I remember I finished this guy and I was like, I don't know, he's cool. I'm happy with him. I like the asymmetrical shoulder design. All the weapons are really fun. This really like sleek, stealthy kind of color scheme of black and Keats orange. I was like, oh, it's so cool. I liked this character quite a lot. But I remember thinking it just wasn't quite what I'd envisioned, Typically, whenever I build, I get an image in my head and then I try to draw it out so I can flesh it out a little bit more. Because whenever I have that image in my head, it's often quite fuzzy. I don't have it in like high definition or anything. So drawing it helps me to fill in the gaps, or just bring up the resolution a little bit more in my head so I can better bring it to life. But yeah, this wasn't quite that vision that I was looking for. So he ended up getting upgraded a few months later into this form. Might have even been in 2013 at this point. Honestly, it's been so long, I don't remember. But this was the upgraded version. And what I liked about this one is he was a little bit taller. He had some cool like electricity pieces. He had a big old weapon, because I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'm giving big old scope. He's so cool. He had those Nuparu blades, which was one of my favorite pieces from a beautiful set, Nuparu and Nika. I wanted to pack in a little bit more personality into this character. I felt like the original one was just a little void of personality. And I was like, hey, this is my secondary self-moc. He's got to have a bit more character, I felt a bit more confident with this version here, and I wanted it to just explore different territory from MOCs that I'd made previously, and I think this was doing that, mainly in the kind of basic frame and the proportions and stuff. And I also tried to pack in a lot of pieces that I really liked, like on the legs there, those Skrull armor pieces in black. I love that piece. The shoulder pads there, they're like spiky ones that came on Gali Mystica. I love that piece. I put it on here. I love that mask. I put it on here. Surge's electricity weapons, I like Surge, I had to put those pieces on there, so that was kind of a lot of the design philosophy, I suppose, behind this. I was just like, I like this piece, I'm gonna find a way to put it on. So yeah, I don't know, I think there was a cool lesson in this of just not settling, I was happy with the MOC, but I wasn't fully happy yet, and it wasn't the vision that I had in mind. So I said, nuts to that, I'm gonna find the best way possible to improve upon it and bring my vision to life. Oh my gosh, this image here. This was a thing people used to do on MOC pages, the website where I used to post a lot of my older MOCs. That website no longer exists, unfortunately, and that's kind of why I'm also doing some of these videos, is so that those images aren't lost on the internet anymore, that people can actually see my old stuff. But people used to post images like this of their MOC, kind of like face palming, or just like with their hand over their face, because it looked cool and edgy. And that was me doing that here with this image here. Wow, that's just unlocked a like treasure trove of memories of people being like, look how cool my character is, I'm doing the signature pose. Yeah, gosh. And then here it is next to my self-moc Kossi, which we'll talk about a little later in this video. That's it for Alterion. Who isn't it? Oh yeah, of course. It's Magma Gear. So the story behind this character. I said to myself, I love the builds of my now friend Shadowgear 6335, otherwise known as Brendan. And I was so inspired by his mock that was called Shadow Gear. I believe that was his secondary self-moc, actually. And I thought, man, can I build some sort of just large Titan-sized build? I think back in the day, I hadn't really done too many Titans, and so I really wanted to experiment with that. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I really like the idea of how Shadow Gear wears this Skral shield piece as a hat. So what if, instead of doing like Brendan and getting some Sharpie and coloring in the red there to make it silver, what if I just kept it red and I built a character that was called Magma Gear instead? Well, that'd be really cool. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I built this mock as well as a way of being like, Shadow Gear Senpai, notice me. And I remember posting it on mock pages, and he was like, oh man, this is really cool, like, thanks for building it. And I was like, oh yay, the guy I look up to likes my stuff. And then from there we started talking, we became best friends, and then we met in New York City. So fun. Anyway, and isn't that cool? The fact you can build a mock and then it can unite and ignite a friendship. That's a beautiful thing. Anyway, so I built Magma Gear, and I believe I built him over like 2 or 3 different days, and I struggled. This was the first time I built a Titan, and I was like, oh wow, these things get heavy very quickly, especially with the way that I build, where I tend to pack in a lot of pieces. And this thing could barely support its own weight. You can kind of see in some of these images it's leaning up against the, in these images it's leaning up against a fridge, and then there's some baking paper underneath on top of an old grill box with a grill still inside it. That was my old photo setup. It got the job done. But yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, there's a popsicle stick inside the torso of this mock, because I remember talking to my dad and he's like, you need like a stronger base of support in the middle. Like, he's an engineer, so I was like, oh cool, okay, he's someone who understands what they're doing. So we like put one of those in and I kind of built around it, and it helped actually, surprisingly. I could probably accomplish that now with just a big old Technic beam, and it would probably be stronger. So yeah, I tried to pack in as many gears as possible to sell the idea of this character being called Magma Gear, and to kind of go with the somewhat gear-shaped hat design. Speaking of the hat, you can see his little face underneath there with his gear eyes. And then yeah, I tried to pack in a bunch of different flame pieces and stuff. Although, in hindsight, those flames on the crotch, that's unfortunate. He's been up to some stuff that I can't talk about on YouTube, I guess, because that's a transmitted disease of some kind. Anyway, but some of these other like fire or magma pieces in here, you can see some of these printed CCBS armor shell pieces with that magma pattern on them. Those, of course, came from the wonderful set Firelord. And I remember at the time, as I was building this, I constantly needed new pieces because my collection was not as big as it is today when I was building this. And I was like, oh man, I need more stuff. So I remember at the time I would just go to the store, I'd buy Firelord, because that was the set that was on the shelf at the time, and then I'd use a bunch of his pieces, put it in here, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I bought 2 or 3 Firelords to end up building this. And I loved the pieces in that set so much, I eventually bought 5 Firelords in total. But not all of those pieces went into this mock, I do believe. But yeah, that was this version, and I remember being like, I'd love to rebuild this one day, because I think I took it apart quite quickly because it just couldn't support its own weight. And then I built this version of Magma Gear. So I tried to add a lot more dark red and other red colors in there too, to really up the fact that he was a magma character. Because before, yeah, it was somewhat present, but I was like, oh, a little bit more red might work. But I was trying to go for this look here of, in the lore that I'd created for these characters, it was like he had a big old fight with characters, and then he was killed, and it was the end of Magma Gear. And then this character was supposed to be like, very Star Wars or just sort of, pulp movies and stuff. Like, he somehow survived even though we all thought he was dead. How? And so I was really trying to go for this look of him being a little battle damaged. You can see in this image here that he's like missing an eye. He's also got a bunch of like wires and things sticking out. So I even kind of turned it into a little bit of a skirt, almost, I guess you could say, or a sash. Maybe a sash is the better word. But yeah, I just refined this a little bit more, and I tried to make it a lot smaller, because I was like, hey, he doesn't need to be that big, and it practically wasn't working beforehand. So yeah, that was the ideas behind this guy. And again, I tried to pack in a lot of different gears here to continue to sell that aesthetic there. I was really happy with him. And then this version was put together for quite a bit of time, and then Callan Lord of Fire on YouTube, he even put this character into some of his animations. He built his own version, of course, but yeah, this was a character that was really fun, and there's only 2 versions I've done of him, but I'd love to build a modern version of this character. But it's cool to see the progression between the 2 there. The final mock now that we're going to talk about is my self-moc Cossie. I want to keep this a little bit brief because I'm running a little over with how long I wanted this episode to be and the amount of time I have to record tonight. But yeah, this was the very first version of Cossie. I spoke about this in the previous video. It was originally meant to be the first version of Cossie. I didn't like it. It became a Surge revamp instead. But this was the sort of second version of Cossie that I was like, oh, I'm happy with this. So I love this. I decided I'm going to make him a bit bigger, kind of Titan sized, not quite, just sort of a little bit taller than a Toa. But again, I tried to pack in pieces I loved, like Surge's, lower leg armor that we see on all of the different Hero Factory 1.0 characters. Building that into a sort of larger leg design, I was quite happy with how that turned out. And I loved this play feature here, giving him kind of pop-out wings that could be stowed away, or they could pop out. Some of the justification for doing that, I believe if I'm not mistaken, I just sort of put them on and then realized they could actually pop out and be wings, and I was like, oh, that's sick. It was a happy little accident. But the mask, because Cossie in the lore that I had created for him was meant to be a part of the Bionicle universe, not the Hero Factory universe, the idea was, I was like, well, I want to give him a mask power because he's a Toa and da-da-da. And, the Hero Factory masks never had mask powers. That wasn't a thing within Hero Factory. So I kind of looked at all the lightning pieces on it and stuff, and the fact that he had lightning on his sword and stuff, and I was like, well, what if it was like a mask of supersonic flights, like he can move incredibly fast or fly very fast? And so I thought, well, those wings kind of tie in with that. I guess that works. And even today, I think that's a great idea for a mask power for that mask. It just sort of fits the look of it quite nicely. And I think I've even had other people tell me that, not knowing that that was the lore that I'd given it to me. They were like, that would actually fit it pretty well. And I was like, right? It does, doesn't it? So it just feels very appropriate to me. But I feel a little biased saying that, of course. But yeah, I was very happy with this, and I was proud to call it my self-moc, unlike that first version there. He went through a couple minor upgrades, like I gave him some swords on his lower legs, as you can see here. I sort of played with the torso a little bit. I tried to add in a few more system greebles and different things, because of course at the time, and still today, I love building system mocs and Bionicle, so I was like, well, let's try and integrate a few system pieces in here and there. There's not that many, but there was a little. But yeah, that version of Cossie, he was together for quite a fair bit of time. And then I decided to do a fun little idea that tied in with the lore for Cossie. This was him if he was a Makuta. And he had these big old creepy looking wings. I made him huge. I gave him giant blades and claws on his fingers. There's that exact same pose from before, the looking at my hand edgy thing that we did on mock pages back then. I was like, you know what, let's just double down on him being, Lord of Darkness and all sorts of stuff like that, him being evil, just the kind of things you build when you're a teenager. Oh, look at that old editing, me with hand-drawn flames that I drew on Microsoft Paint. Fantastic. No, I love that. It's also cool because I know if I try to recreate that image today, I could do it 1,000 times better. It's always fun to see how you've grown as an artist. But yeah, I remember liking this version. It was a little bit fun, a little bit different, and it was not meant to be canon in the lore for my self-moc. But that's what I did. That's fun. And then I just wasn't happy with it. There was kind of this turning point with me with mocking where I was like, man, I just don't like how this looks. I want to grow as a builder a lot more, but I didn't know how. And I entered into this pretty long mocking block, which tied in with some of my mental health at the time. And I spent ages trying to rebuild Cossie. I took him apart and I just couldn't get him to work. And this here is some whip pictures or work in progress photos as I was working on his next version. And I remember really struggling with this leg design and not knowing how to transition it into the torso. I spoke to people like Lord Oblivion, my friend Felix at the time, a bunch of different people, and I was like, what can I do? I just don't understand. I'm doubting myself as a builder. What can I do? And then eventually one day I made this version, and I gave him these cool blue fire flame wings because I liked the wing concept from before, and I was like, what if I could make it fiery? That could be interesting. And I used a bunch more kind of modern pieces like CCBS armor shells and different stuff like that. And yeah, just tried to kind of tighten up the colors, tighten up the textures a little bit. And I turned them into something I was very, very proud of. And I've mentioned it before in previous videos. This mock to me represents kind of coming out of that time where my mental health wasn't so good, and overcoming that mocking block, which at the time I did not feel like I could ever do. And this mock sort of springboarded a bunch of other mocks after that, and really kind of kickstarted this YouTube channel and kickstarted just my deep, deep love of LEGO that I still have today. So I still keep this mock build, even though I know I could build it better today, because it is sort of symbolic of what this channel represents, just inspiration, creativity, all that sort of stuff. He has undergone some minor changes. I removed the flame wings because they were very, very brittle. Eventually actually evolved that even further to some more system pieces, and this is pretty much how he looks today. I also made a version here called Red Cossie, or Rossi, doing a weird sort of kind of joke. Where did I get that red mask from? It is a bootleg mask that a person named Monarth sent me because he happened to find a red Surge that he found at some, I don't know where he got it from, but it's a bootleg set, it's not official. And I thought, well, what if I just make a red clone of Cossie? That could be fun. And I have that mock taken apart, but its pieces are in a separate drawer somewhere. I should rebuild him one day. But yeah, that's a bit of fun. And that's how Cossie looks today, and I guess that's a bit of the story behind this character. I could go into way more detail about it, and heck, if you really wanted to hear the full backstory for that character, there's a Word document on my computer in one of my hard drives that's like 7 pages long of all the deep, deep lore for that character that I wrote when I was in high school. So hey, if you're interested in any of that other stuff, maybe I could do a separate video on the history of my self-moc, but that's a brief overview right there. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing all of that, and hopefully you enjoyed seeing some comparison between older versions and newer versions of all of these different characters, and I certainly hope it gave you some ideas and inspiration. And hey, maybe you could take a look through your old hard drives and see if there's any old photos of your old MOCs, and you can reflect on how you've grown as a builder. That was fun personally for me to do in this episode today, so hopefully you can maybe do the same. Thanks for watching, guys. Happy building, and bye for now.